Good afternoon. We will only have one video up today, so this particular one on the Psalm 31, will deal a little bit with the text itself and also with hymn settings that relate to it. And part of that is because I have an evening meeting tonight, a Zoom meeting, conference call kind of thing, and concerns what's coming next for us as a congregation, as the church generally in our area, as we're continuing to deal with this public health emergency. Today we're looking at Psalm 31. This is a prayer for deliverance, and for us it might be especially appropriate given this impersonal enemy with which we're dealing, an enemy laying snares in all public places. We'll start by doing a responsive reading in the style of those psalms in the back of our hymnal. Again, we'll be using the Open English Bible, which is a copyright-free contemporary translation. Then we'll continue with 3 older renderings of the psalm into verse so that they are now hymns. And so 3 hymn settings for this psalm. And I'll conclude then with a few observations about the text and also our usual reflection questions. So first, our responsive reading.
Almighty fortress is our God, our bulwark never failing.
In you, O Lord, I take refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Rescue me in your faithfulness. And together, incline to me your ear, deliver me speedily, be to me a rock of defense, a fortified house to save me. For my rock and my fortress are you. Lead me, guide me, so that your name will be honored. Together, draw me out of the net they have hid for me, for you yourself are my refuge.
Almighty fortress is our God, our bulwark never failing.
Into your hand I commend my spirit. You ransom me, Lord, faithful God. My times are in your hand. Save me from the hand of the foes who pursue me. Together, make your face to shine on your servant. Save me in your love.
Almighty fortress is our God, our bulwark never failing.
The lyrics of the first hymn from the 1912 Psalter can be sung to any common meter tune. That would include tunes like Amazing Grace, for example. As it was written, it actually has 12 verses, but I'm only sharing those verses that are specifically related to the verses of the lectionary lesson as we have already looked at it. I could not find the tune with which it is printed in the Psalter, so we're using a substitute tune called Detroit. The second one, also from the Psalter, was set to a tune called Ariel. That's a tune I found to be difficult, so I'm substituting one that I thought was easier. And this particular one I find to be quite cheerful or optimistic. The name of this tune is Meribah. Now, if one wanted a more somber feel, the tune called Cornwall also works. The third hymn, also from the Psalter, uses a fairly easy tune called Lebanon. Now, I think the more familiar tunes, Diademata and Terabiata, also work well, so you could consider those as substitute tunes for it. So to wrap up this video, what does this text say about Jesus? The early church connected this psalm to the crucifixion, with Jesus quoting from verse 5 and at least alluding to other portions of the psalm. The verse as a whole, verse 5 as a whole, I take as a prayer, which I would paraphrase as, I am yours. Don't let all this be for nothing. As Christians, our affirmation is that God can bring good even out of the worst, even out of the most evil of times. We might also think, with regard to this particular psalm, we might think of the martyred deacon Stephen, who took this same verse, verse 5, as some of his final words. Another question to focus was, what do we learn about God's grace? Another one, where am I challenged to learn something? Another one, how are we challenged to change? Let me focus on that a moment. When times are difficult, it is sometimes easy to question God's love for us, or even God's goodness. I've known many for whom that was true. So I find this psalm as a setting of an example to follow. That's how I take it. It's not that I'm expecting that God will just make it all better, make it all go away just because I'm praying. Rather, I'm trusting God to go with me in the midst of it, just as we talked about with Psalm 23, for example. And even if it seems justice is delayed or even denied, we'll trust God to balance the scales in God's time and in God's way. That's the message of the Revelation. So finally, what songs come to mind for you as you read this text, heard this text today? For me, A Mighty Fortress is an obvious one, but what else is suggested for you? As I said, this is the only video going up today, the only video on the psalm. Tomorrow I'll be back to consider with you our reading from the epistle. And until then, I hope you have a good afternoon, a good evening. May grace and peace be yours in abundance.